Before we dive into this deeply troubling case from Nova Scotia, if you're interested in true crime stories and want to stay updated on cases like this, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. It really helps the channel grow and allows us to continue covering important stories that need attention. January 2026, Nova Scotia. 8 months since 2 children vanished without trace. A veteran detective with 33 years' experience calls it extremely rare. He's never seen anything like it. Now, their grandmother breaks her silence. My heart tells me these babies are gone. But this isn't just another retelling. This is Belinda Gray's story, the grandmother who heard police sirens at dawn, who searched the woods calling Jackie Boy, who watched hope die slowly over 8 agonizing months. The 911 call came in at dawn on May 2, 2025. A mother's frantic voice reported that her 2 young children, 6-year-old Lily Sullivan and 4-year-old Jack Sullivan, had vanished from their bedroom overnight in Landown Station, Nova Scotia. But the first person Belinda Gray heard the news from wasn't the police, it was a relative's phone call that afternoon asking if she'd heard what happened. Belinda Gray lives in Middle Muscotoboit, a small community on Nova Scotia's eastern shore, about an hour's drive from Landown Station. The children were her grandchildren through her son Cody Sullivan, Lily and Jack's biological father. She keeps their photographs close, including one from their first day of school in September 2024, images that now serve as painful reminders of happier times. Gray's relationship with the children had been complicated by family circumstances. The last time she had actually seen Lily and Jack in person was nearly 2 years before their disappearance. This arrangement resulted from the breakdown of the relationship between their mother Malia Brooks Murray and Gray's son Cody. When the relationship ended, Cody made the painful decision to essentially step away rather than fight for custody, though he continued paying child support contrary to what some would later claim. On the early morning of May 3, flashing red and blue police lights pulled into Gray's driveway. Even before the RCMP officers knocked on her door, she knew why they were there. The officers came inside but only stood in the kitchen. They asked her to wake up Cody and questioned him about when he had last seen the children, confirming that Lily and Jack weren't at Gray's home. It was a brief interaction, professional and procedural, but one that marked the beginning of Gray's journey into a nightmare that would consume the next 8 months of her life. The children had disappeared from Gearlock Road in Landown Station, a hamlet of fewer than 500 residents where cellular service is spotty and the nearest neighbor might be beyond shouting distance. Once a bustling railway stop filled with Scottish immigrants who excavated iron and copper from deep hillside mines, Landown now consisted mostly of aging homes, dense spruce forests, and the skeletal remains of its industrial past. The terrain was unforgiving. Dense forests, steep ravines, abandoned mine shafts, and bogs that could swallow evidence and small bodies alike. When Belinda Gray traveled to Pictou County on May 3 to help with the search efforts, she joined what had already become one of the largest search operations in recent Nova Scotia history. Within hours of the 911 call, RCMP officers, search and rescue volunteers, and concerned community members had converged on the rural property where Lily and Jack had last been seen. Gray walked through dense woods alongside strangers and community members, all united in desperate hope. She would yell for Lily and for Jack, using the family's affectionate nickname for the boy. Jackie Boy, her voice carried through the trees, breaking with emotion each time she called out. She searched alongside volunteers who had taken time off work, who had driven from neighboring communities, who had no connection to her grandchildren except shared humanity and the instinct to protect children. By May 3, at least 100 searchers were actively combing the forests. The number would swell to 160 individuals by May 4, according to RCMP Staff Sergeant Curtis McKinnon. This represented a massive mobilization of resources for a rural area. Search and rescue teams came from across the province. Ground search teams spread out in grids to systematically cover the terrain. Cadaver dogs trained to detect human remains searched likely areas. Drones equipped with thermal imaging cameras flew overhead hoping to detect heat signatures. Helicopters provided aerial views of the expansive wilderness. For Gray, watching this enormous effort unfold brought conflicting emotions. The scale of the response demonstrated how seriously authorities were taking the disappearance, how many people cared about finding her grandchildren. But it also underscored the severity of the situation. You don't deploy 160 searchers, helicopters, and cadaver dogs unless you believe something terrible has happened. She kept telling herself that searchers would find them. In the back of her mind, she clung to hope that this would be resolved quickly, that perhaps Lily and Jack had spent a cold and frightening night in the woods but would ultimately be found unharmed. She had to believe that. The alternative was unthinkable for a grandmother who had already lost 2 years of watching them grow. But like all the other searchers, Gray found nothing. No response to her calls. No sign of the children. No trace beyond a pink blanket and what appeared to be child-sized boot prints discovered near railroad tracks. As the search continued into its third and fourth days, Belinda Gray began learning details about her grandchildren's lives that she hadn't known. Details that would haunt her in the months to come, filling her with questions about what she might have missed during those 2 years of separation. Weeks before the disappearance, concerning patterns had emerged at Salt Springs Elementary School where Lily and Jack attended classes. School staff had documented unexplained injuries on Jack, particularly facial bruising and black eyes that appeared with troubling frequency. Photographs from school events told a disturbing story. In December 2024, about 5 months before he vanished, a class field trip photo showed Jack sitting with other students, a green and purple bruise clearly visible below his left eye. Another photograph from September 2024 showed what appeared to be additional facial bruising. The children arrived at school without appropriate winter clothing for harsh Nova Scotia weather, prompting staff to provide coats and boots so they wouldn't suffer from the cold. They were often described as appearing unkempt and poorly groomed, suggesting basic hygiene needs weren't being consistently met at home. School employees noted that both children seemed developmentally behind other children their age, showing delays that raised concerns among educators who worked with them daily. A child protection social worker had been contacted through the school and paid at least one visit to the mobile home in the months before the disappearance. The fact that such a visit occurred confirmed that professionals who worked with Lily and Jack were worried enough about their well-being to involve authorities. For Gray, learning these details after the fact was agonizing. She had thought Malia and Cody were the picture-perfect family when they were together. When that relationship ended and her son stepped away, she had no window into how her grandchildren were living. The 2-year separation meant she hadn't seen the bruises, hadn't noticed the neglect, hadn't known that the system had been alerted but the children remained in the home. The final confirmed sighting of Lily and Jack was security footage showing the family together on the evening of May 1st, returning from grocery shopping at 10:19 p.m. After that, nothing. Her grandchildren existed in that footage, and then they simply didn't exist anymore. On May 7th, just 5 days after her grandchildren vanished, Belinda Gray heard the announcement that shattered what remained of her hope. RCMP Staff Sergeant Curtis McKinnon held a press conference to announce that despite extensive efforts, there had been no confirmed sightings of the children anywhere in the province or beyond. More significantly, more ominously, he stated that at this point it was unlikely the children were still alive. Gray had been clinging to the possibility that Lily and Jack were lost but surviving, that their young bodies might endure the cold Nova Scotia nights long enough for searchers to find them. McKinnon's words stripped away that comfort. Professional search and rescue personnel, people who had seen countless cases and knew what children could survive, were telling her that her grandchildren were almost certainly dead. The evidence discovered near the railroad tracks had initially seemed hopeful. Pieces of Lily's pink blanket were found there, along with impressions in the ground that matched child-sized footwear, specifically the type Lily had been wearing. If the children had wandered away as initially reported, finding these items would be consistent with that story. Children getting lost often leave trails of belongings as they move through terrain. But then came a detail that complicated everything. A second piece of the same pink blanket was discovered in the trash at the family property. Gray struggled to understand this. If Lily had been carrying her blanket when she wandered into the woods and it had torn, with one piece being left near the railroad tracks, how did another piece end up in the household trash? Did someone find it and dispose of it? Did the blanket tear inside the home? Or did this suggest something far worse, that evidence was being staged or disposed of? Neighbors had reported hearing vehicle activity in the pre-dawn hours of May 2nd. One neighbor described hearing a vehicle near the railroad tracks, the car going silent for approximately 2 minutes, then driving off. Another reported seeing vehicle lights over the treetops multiple times after midnight. Yet when RCMP reviewed surveillance footage from cameras covering those time periods, they reportedly found no evidence of vehicles traveling at those times. For Gray, these contradictions were maddening. Every piece of evidence seemed to point in multiple directions simultaneously, suggesting both innocent wandering and something sinister, both accident and deliberate action. The case was formally shifted from a search and rescue operation to a criminal investigation led by the Northeast Nova RCMP Major Crime Unit. For Belinda Gray, this designation confirmed what she had begun to suspect. Authorities believed this wasn't simply a case of children accidentally wandering off. More than 11 different RCMP units became involved, a massive allocation of resources that demonstrated how seriously the force was taking the case. Gray watched from the outside as investigators conducted formal interviews with 54 different individuals who potentially had relevant information. Many of these individuals were given polygraph examinations, including the adults who had been present in the home the night her grandchildren disappeared. The polygraph results, as they were eventually revealed through court documents, painted a confusing picture. Daniel Martel, the children's stepfather, underwent examination and publicly stated he had passed. Court documents confirmed this, indicating his responses were found to be truthful regarding his knowledge of what happened to Lily and Jack. Malia Brooks Murray, the children's mother, took a polygraph on May 22, and her answers were also found to be truthful. Janie McKenzie, Martel's mother who lived in the camper trailer on the property, took an examination on June 10, but her results were inconclusive, her physiology was not suitable for analysis. Most significantly for Gray's family, her son Cody Sullivan underwent a polygraph examination on June 12, 2025. His results showed he was determined to be truthful in his statements to police. This helped dispel early speculation, including from Brooks Murray herself, that perhaps Cody had taken the children. Gray had never believed her son capable of such a thing, but having the polygraph confirm his truthfulness provided some small measure of relief in an otherwise nightmare scenario. The fact that the primary adults all either passed their polygraph tests or provided inconclusive results left investigators, and Gray, with a troubling question. If these individuals were being truthful about not knowing what happened to the children, then where did that leave the investigation? It suggested either a tragic accident that truly no one had knowledge of, or someone was capable of defeating the polygraph test, or answers lay beyond the immediate family circle. Gray found herself in an impossible position, caught between wanting to believe the mother of her grandchildren while simultaneously questioning how 2 children could vanish from a small mobile home with 3 adults present without anyone knowing anything. In June 2025, about 6 weeks after the disappearance, Belinda Gray made the decision to speak publicly about her experience and her feelings. She could no longer remain silent while questions swirled and her grandchildren remained missing. In an interview with CBC News, she made a heartbreaking statement that would become one of the most quoted lines from the case. "My heart tells me these babies are gone," she said, her voice carrying the weight of accumulated grief. She told the reporter she didn't believe the children were alive anymore. For a grandmother to reach this point, to publicly acknowledge that she had lost hope of ever seeing her grandchildren alive again, spoke to the depth of despair that comes from weeks of uncertainty and unanswered questions. Gray's decision to speak publicly wasn't about giving up. It was about keeping Lily and Jack's case in the public eye, applying pressure on authorities to continue investigating, and potentially encouraging someone who knows something to come forward. She believed that sometimes public statements from grieving family members can strike a chord with someone who has been holding back information, either out of fear or misplaced loyalty. During her interview, Gray spoke about the family dynamics that led to the children being in their mother's care rather than with their biological father. She described how she initially thought Malia and Cody were the picture-perfect family, how they seemed happy together and the children appeared to be in a stable, loving home. But then the relationship deteriorated. When Malia decided to end it, Cody made the painful decision to step away rather than fight for custody or visitation. Gray acknowledged this decision had consequences. Those 2 years of separation meant she hadn't been present in her grandchildren's daily lives. She hadn't seen the warning signs that school staff documented. She hadn't known about the bruises, the neglect, the child protection visit. The guilt of not knowing, of not being there to potentially intervene, added another layer to her grief. Evidence scattered across multiple locations suggested possible staging to investigators. Items found both in wilderness areas and inside the home created a puzzle that didn't fit any simple explanation. Prior neglect investigations documented for months raised questions about whether something tragic had happened and been concealed to prevent scrutiny. But massive searches had found nothing. Where does one hide 2 small bodies in the most thoroughly combed wilderness in provincial history? As summer 2025 wore on, Belinda Gray found herself grappling with every possible theory about what had happened to her grandchildren. The remote location of the property meant stranger abduction remained a viable possibility. Vulnerable children in an isolated area presented opportunity for someone with predatory intentions. Yet no witnesses had come forward. No ransom demands were made. No similar crimes had been reported in the region. Gray struggled with this theory because it raised impossible questions. How would an external predator know the children's routines? How would they access such an isolated property undetected? How would they navigate unfamiliar terrain in the dark and leave no forensic trace? The wilderness itself argued against it. Strangers unfamiliar with the landscape would struggle to move through it efficiently, let alone abduct 2 children and vanish without evidence. Investigators had explored this possibility thoroughly. They had requested surveillance footage from the Cobequid Pass, a tolled section of highway that would be used by anyone traveling from Pictou County toward New Brunswick. They sought video records showing vehicles leaving Nova Scotia between May 1 at 2:25 p.m. and May 3 at 3 a.m., covering the critical time period when the children disappeared. The theory about Cody Sullivan, Gray's own son, taking the children had been investigated and dismissed. Camera footage and other evidence had confirmed his alibi. He had been at home, hadn't been anywhere near Landown Station, and the video review confirmed that Jack and Lily did not leave Nova Scotia with him. Gray had never believed her son capable of harming his children, but she understood why investigators had to examine every possibility, even painful ones. By July 2025, something significant happened in how the investigation was being classified. According to court documents eventually released to media outlets, as of July 16, the RCMP no longer considered the case to be criminal in nature. This was a remarkable shift that Gray struggled to understand. It suggested that despite months of intensive investigation, despite all the suspicious circumstances, police had not found sufficient evidence to definitively conclude that a crime had been committed. They continued to investigate under the Missing Persons Act rather than as a criminal prosecution, but emphasized they had not ruled out that the disappearance was suspicious. For Gray, this meant continuing to live in limbo, without answers, without closure, without the justice she desperately wanted for Lily and Jack. The decision by RCMP to no longer classify the case as criminal left Belinda Gray feeling both confused and frustrated. What did it mean that there wasn't enough evidence of a crime when 2 children had vanished without explanation? She understood the legal distinctions that investigators had to navigate, but emotionally it felt like a step backward, like authorities were giving up on finding accountability for whatever had happened to her grandchildren. The lack of physical evidence was the crux of the problem. Despite extensive searches, despite cadaver dogs combing the property and surrounding wilderness, despite investigators examining the mobile home from top to bottom, the septic system, wells, outbuildings, and even dangerous old mine shafts in the vicinity, nothing had been found. No bodies. No definitive proof of foul play. No forensic evidence that could build a criminal case. In October 2025, 6 months after the children vanished, a volunteer organization called Please Bring Me Home conducted additional searches of the area. Gray appreciated these efforts from the Ontario-based charity that specialized in searching for missing persons. They brought trained volunteers who used systematic search techniques, carefully documenting everything they found. The volunteers split into groups and kept meticulous records of where they looked, what they found, and GPS coordinates of any items that seemed potentially relevant. During this volunteer search, various items were discovered in the woods: a child's t-shirt, what appeared to be pieces of a blanket, a tricycle. Each discovery raised Gray's hopes that perhaps something crucial had been found. But when these items were reported to the RCMP and analyzed, police stated that none of them were relevant to their investigation into Lily and Jack's disappearance. The lead searcher from Please Bring Me Home made an observation that resonated with Gray's own growing suspicions. He noted that based on the extensive number of tags, ribbons, and markers showing where previous searches had already covered, he was increasingly skeptical that the children had simply wandered into the woods. The area had been searched more thoroughly than perhaps any wilderness area in Nova Scotia's history. If the children had died from exposure or accident in those woods, their remains should have been found by now. Gray was beginning to accept a terrible truth: her grandchildren were not in those woods. They were somewhere else, taken somewhere, hidden somewhere, or disposed of somewhere that hundreds of searchers had not looked. On October 29, 2025, Belinda Gray attended a vigil to mark what would have been Jack's 5th birthday. This somber gathering brought together family members, community members, and others who had been following the case. Gray stood among them, holding photographs of her grandson, remembering the little boy who should have been blowing out candles on a birthday cake, opening presents, celebrating with family. Instead, she was mourning a child whose fate remained unknown 7 months after his disappearance. The vigil was both a tribute to Jack and Lily and a public demonstration that they had not been forgotten, that people still cared, that the search for answers continued even as official efforts seemed to stall. The government of Nova Scotia had announced a substantial reward, offering up to $150,000 for information deemed to be of investigative value that leads to locating the children. This was a significant sum, particularly in a rural area where many people struggled economically. Gray had hoped the reward would provide strong incentive for anyone holding back information, whether out of fear, family loyalty, or uncertainty about whether what they knew was important. Yet despite this substantial reward being publicized widely, no breakthrough materialized. No one came forward with information that led to locating the children or definitively explaining what happened to them. The silence was deafening and suggested to Gray that either very few people truly knew what happened, or those who did know were deeply invested in keeping the secret. Gray's statement from June continued to define her public position. She had surrendered hope that her grandchildren would be found alive. 8 months of searching, 8 months of unanswered questions, 8 months of watching massive efforts yield nothing had transformed her grief from desperate hope into resigned acceptance of loss. She wanted answers now, even if those answers confirmed her worst fears. The not knowing was its own special torture. It left her unable to properly grieve, unable to achieve closure, unable to move forward with her life. She couldn't plan a funeral or memorial service because there were no bodies to bury. She couldn't achieve justice because there was no proven crime. She existed in a perpetual state of suspended anguish, waiting for information that might never come. As 2025 came to a close and 2026 began, Belinda Gray reflected on what had been an impossibly difficult holiday season. In an interview with local media, she described staying home for Christmas rather than participating in family gatherings or celebrations. She said she just couldn't bring herself to go out for Christmas this year. The thought of celebrating, of pretending to be festive and joyful when her grandchildren were missing and likely deceased, was too much to bear. Christmas 2025 marked 8 months without Lily and Jack. 8 months of not knowing what happened to them. 8 months of pain that showed no signs of resolution. She described the holiday season as somber and quiet, a stark contrast to what it should have been, with young grandchildren opening presents, their faces bright with excitement and wonder. In late December, RCMP Superintendent Dan Morrow, a criminal operations officer with 33 years of policing experience, gave an interview reflecting on the year in policing. When asked about the Sullivan case, he made a statement that captured the unusual nature of this investigation. He said that in all his years of law enforcement, he had never seen a case like this. He described it as extremely rare. For Gray, hearing a veteran officer with over 3 decades of experience say he'd never encountered anything similar was both validating and terrifying. It validated her sense that something truly inexplicable had happened to her grandchildren. But it also terrified her, because if experienced investigators couldn't solve this case, what hope was there for answers? The RCMP released a statement on December 31, 2025, as the year ended. They affirmed that the investigative team remained committed to pursuing every credible lead and determining with certainty what happened to Lily and Jack. Gray appreciated this commitment, but words without results brought little comfort. She expressed hope that 2026 might be the year the case is finally solved. She wanted answers desperately. Even if those answers confirmed her worst fears, even if they brought unbearable pain, they would be better than this endless uncertainty. The not knowing prevented her from properly grieving, from finding any measure of peace, from honoring her grandchildren's memory in the way they deserved. Gray keeps their photographs close. That image from their first day of school in September 2024 remains a treasured possession, a reminder of 2 innocent children who deserved so much better than whatever fate befell them. She remembers walking through those woods in May 2025, calling out, "Jackie boy," over and over, hoping against hope for a response that never came. Someone knows what happened to Lily and Jack Sullivan. The evidence contradictions, the timeline inconsistencies, the prior warning signs all point toward human knowledge and human action. Whether accident concealed, neglect hidden, or something darker, someone holds the key to solving this case. For Belinda Gray, the grandmother who has watched hope die slowly over 8 agonizing months, that knowledge provides no comfort. She can only wait, advocate publicly for continued investigation, and hope that whoever knows something will finally find the courage or conscience to tell the truth. If you have any information about this case, no matter how insignificant it might seem, please contact the Nova Scotia RCMP immediately. There is a reward of up to $150,000 for information that is of investigative value. Your tip could be the piece that finally allows Belinda Gray and the rest of the family to find answers and bring Lily and Jack home. Thank you for watching this coverage of the Sullivan case from Belinda Gray's perspective. If you found this important and want to see continued coverage of cases like this, please remember to subscribe to the channel and leave a like on this video. Share this story and keep Lily and Jack's names in circulation. Their grandmother deserves answers, and these children deserve justice.